Welcome to Vernacular Verbose, Jethro Tull podcast. We're continuing on with our deep dive of the Tull discography, and today coming to a Passion Play, 1973. We realized that the past couple episodes we've been forgetting to say our names, so we're going to make a point of introducing ourselves again here. My name is Joey Vetter.
My name is Eugene Manko.
And together we are two Tull enthusiasts, musicians, determined to bring you some good, intelligent, critical discussion of the Tull discography. So Passion Play today, this is a pretty interesting and noteworthy entry in the discography, particularly following on Thick as a Brick, where I see this album as more or less a double feature with Thick as a Brick. And I know there's some qualms there, and there's definitely ways that Passion Play is different. But what do you think about that, Eugene?
Well, for me, historically, it definitely was a double feature because I had a cassette with Thick as a Brick on one side and a Passion Play on the other. And my first acquaintance with both albums happened at the same time with that cassette, and I listened to it a lot in like late school.
It's interesting how you have all these Tull cassettes with like two albums on them. Were those all bootlegs?
These weren't bootlegs. These were just copies that I made in a kiosk where I bought a blank tape and gave it to them, and they recorded the albums on one side or the other. But it's interesting that when we started getting CDs, there have been Russian-made bootlegs with two albums on one CD.
Huh. That's interesting. I've never really heard of that sort of cassette copying culture. Maybe that was a thing just before my time, or maybe it's a Europe thing. I don't know.
Well, it definitely was a thing in the States with like Grateful Dead. You know, people have stacks upon stacks of Grateful Dead tapes.
Yeah, well, I'm too young for it then. With Passion Play, the main difference, I think, with Passion Play compared to Thick as a Brick is that Passion Play is much more linear in terms of its story and its concept, where we talked a lot about kind of how abstract Thick as a Brick is and how it's not really a story with a beginning and an end, so to speak, whereas Passion Play is very much structured to have characters with a beginning, middle, and an end. Although that being said, the end of Passion Play is kind of suggesting that there is no end. You know, that's kind of the point of it. But still, that being said, in keeping with kind of the play structure, it's even broken down into acts with an intermission and that kind of thing. So I would say where Thick as a Brick is more like, you know, a David Lynch movie or something where you're constantly morphing between scenes with no real context. Passion Play is different in the sense that there's a lot of explanation and exposition given to what's going on.
Yeah, that's true. The lyrics for Thick as a Brick are kind of musings of a person, while a Passion Play is a story of a person, from basically told from a third-person perspective.
Right. Although one of the things that's interesting about that is that I think a lot of the exposition and the context for the album is only really given in the program, which is, if I remember right, was included sort of in the liner notes with the original vinyl. So it introduces a lot of characters. It has like band members and roadies sort of with their pictures listed as the cast and crew of the play and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I feel like probably unlike, maybe that will be controversial with some people, unlike the newspaper in Thick as a Brick, which is very much a big part of the album experience, no matter whether you read it or not. The Linwell Theatre program, as I'm looking at it right now, I have the vinyl from 1973 with this program. In the middle is just like, it's a small insert in the middle of the gatefold. And everyone's photos are like with pseudonyms. So Martin Barr is Derek Small, and Ian Anderson is Mark Ridley, and etc. And it really doesn't provide a ton of context for the story in the album. You've got the acts where they are happening, like the cemetery, the memory bank, the business office of G.O.D. and Son, but they are very much like additional cues for imagination, but they are not an explanation of what's actually occurring. And you have to sort of grok that G.O.D. is God and so on.
Yeah, the main thing I was thinking of was like you said, the settings that are sort of introduced in the program.
And the information about the actors, as it were, is completely inconsequential to the album and to the rest of the information. It's kind of little biographies which don't really add much. It's just like an extra layer of fantasy.
Does it mention the name of the protagonist, the Ronnie Pilgrim guy?
Yes, Ronnie Pilgrim's funeral, which it says on Act 1.
Yeah, because that's the only place where it mentions the name of the guy, because the name is never mentioned in the lyrics.
Yeah.
I think musically, something that I never really consciously thought about until I listened to the album last night to prepare for this, was that musically speaking, it's much less linear when it comes to music, in the sense that the music is generally a lot more complex, and there's a lot of very sudden, fast, eccentric changes in the music compared to Thick as a Brick. And I never really, I guess, consciously realized it until last night, how different it was in that respect, and sort of how more fast-paced. It's almost at more of a breakneck speed, not literally speaking, like the tempos aren't faster necessarily, but there's just so much happening all the time in Passion Play compared to Thick as a Brick.
Yeah, the music is very kind of theatrical and narrative in places where we can sort of imagine a scene change, a very sudden turnaround of decorations or things like that.
And in my opinion, Passion Play has some of the band's best instrumental music ever. A lot of the instrumental pieces, the jigs and that kind of thing in between verses. Some of it is really magnificent. I think some of the band's like best recorded material.
Yeah, hard agree. It's pretty glorious as music goes. And I have heard a lot of praise about Ian's vocals on this album, even from himself.
Yeah.
What do you think of the Steven Wilson version versus the other remasters?
This is, I think it's fair to say, this is the most consequential remix of the remixes that have been released so far, in the sense that it's the most different from the other ones. So there's a whole added section in the foot of our stairs, which we'll discuss at that point. But even beyond that, there's quite a bit that was also removed from the album. So for example, there's a couple different saxophone lines which are apparently removed, although to be honest, I've heard the remix many times and I have never missed any saxophone. I'm not sure where those lines are that were taken out exactly.
I listened to it closely yesterday. I first listened to my vinyl version, so the original mix, and then to the Steven Wilson mix, and what I identified is one saxophone phrase that was removed. And to give Steven Wilson credit, don't tell Ian because he'll be furious, one saxophone phrase that was added. I will make a note of that in the sections as we come to them. But on a general level, the Steven Wilson mix is very surprising to me in the ways that, in how Ian Anderson describes what they set out to do. Because I think they ended up with something completely opposite to what they set out to do. I will quote from the liner notes to the Steven Wilson reissue. I suggested to Steven that the object of the remix exercise should be to strip it back to the melody, lyrics, and essential instrumentation. Don't feel obliged to set out a mix where you can hear everything that's been recorded. And it is now more of a transparent and bearable listening experience than the original mix, as Ian puts it. You may disagree with me, a lot of people may disagree with me, but I feel that it couldn't be farther from the truth. Because to me, the Steven Wilson mix feels overloaded with detail compared to the original one. And it is very interesting to listen to. You can hear a lot of stuff that you will not catch in the original mix, but to me, it feels like you start to lose the sight of the forest for the trees. It doesn't, to me, feel as cohesive as either the original mix or the 2003 remaster or the MFSL version, if you prefer that. My opinion is that the Steven Wilson mix of A Passion Play is not the definitive A Passion Play experience. It is very welcome as an additional source of information about the album, about what is happening in there, but it just starts to fall apart for me.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard the mix, I generally didn't like it because I was a little peeved about some of the things they took out. I was a little on the fence about the fact that they put in unused, cut material. I think the thing to keep in mind, just for like the general listeners, about this remixes is that Ian is a creative advisor on them, essentially, and he has final approval over all the mixes. So I think in a way that's kind of a good thing, in a way maybe it's kind of a bad thing. The thing that's good about it, I think, is that for an album like this, if there was a remix that Ian was not at all involved with, that nobody from the Tull camp was involved with, and they decided to put in cut material back into the album. I would be totally against that because I think that would be totally against what the intention of the musicians, of the artist was. But that being said, so on a remix like this, the material that was put back in was approved by Ian. So for that, it kind of soothes that a little for me, just in the sense that, you know, I mean, if the artist is fine with it, then, you know, whatever, it's their thing. But, I mean, I think in general, this is kind of a long-winded answer, but I can't say that I have a preference for or against the remix. I notice some things that are gone. I notice some things that are added. For me personally, the fact that Ian approved it and that he's fine with it means that I'm generally fine with it. But it's definitely different, and it's really the only remix that I think it's a real different experience for sort of a die-hard Tull fan to listen to this album and the original mix.
Yeah, but would you agree to say to a new fan that they should listen to this version instead of any of the other remasters or the original mix?
I think part of it would depend on accessibility. Just I don't really know how accessible the original mixes are now. I know that at least on Apple Music, I think most everything that has a remix is the remix, except for like War Child, I think. So for me, it'd be more about accessibility. I don't think the differences are so major that I would encourage someone to seek out the original mix, but I don't know.
Well, the 2003 remaster is available on Spotify along with the 2014 version. So,
but it very well could be that there's more that was changed than I'm even aware of. Because, like I said, I've never even noticed the saxophone missing or even the added saxophone. This is the first time I'm hearing about that.
I just think the balance is so different that the details just start getting overwhelming in places and distracting. It feels to me less together.
I think in general I notice more things removed than added.
Well, yes, of course. If you're used to it sounding a particular way, it will be jarring when something is missing.
Yeah. And the context for all of this, just for anybody who doesn't know, is that Ian isn't really a fan of this album. And I think he's always been kind of unhappy with it. I think he let the critics kind of get to him. I mean, to be honest, I think he's the kind of person who he kind of always lets criticism get to him, to be honest. But particularly on this album, for anyone who doesn't know, it was savaged pretty harshly by critics at the time when it came out, even though it was actually a pretty big commercial success. And this was, I think, the first Tull album that was like really negatively received in the music press. And so I think that has kind of always left a bad taste in Ian's mouth about this album.
Yeah, maybe. Interesting that he was already talking about critics, because the song Only Solitaire was written before Passion Play and recorded in the Shadow sessions. So he already had the outlook on critics as being partly irrelevant, but still, isn't a big fan of his saxophone playing. And I think he's not being fair on himself, but I can understand that his view on that has been marred by his personal experience with the instrument, which he expressly didn't enjoy playing, and self-confessed to just have had practiced too little. So his embouchure, his lip, couldn't really bear the strain of having the reed vibrating like along it all of the time, and it was very tiring. And as a person who plays the flute and the soprano saxophone, I totally know what he means, because if you hadn't practiced the soprano saxophone or even a bigger kind of saxophone for a long time, your face starts falling off in the matter of half an hour of playing.
It was always kind of weird to me how, even though he really hated the saxophone, and he hated it then, that he decided to do a whole album with tons of saxophone. I never really understood that.
Well, yeah, I think he just set out to do it, and it didn't make sense to change horses halfway, you know. There is still saxophone on War Child, so he wasn't as disillusioned with it, probably. He may be, it may kind of his view of the past right now, the way he talks about it, than it was at the moment.
Yeah. There's a great quote from Ian about sort of the fan reception to Passion Play. And I think this is in the Steve Wilson booklet, and I may not get this right exactly, but he says something about how there's even people out there in the world who think Passion Play is their favorite Tull album, but they should, of course, remain in the asylum for the criminally insane where they belong, or something like that.
Well, it seems like one of these people broke out of the asylum and is on a certain podcast right now.
So I want to talk a lot about the way that this album is received among Tull fans, because I'm sure you've noticed this, but I feel like even, especially over time, this album has a really big fan base now on the internet particularly. And that's really interesting because I don't know if it's always been like that. I think it was something that kind of built over time, and I think even still this album is still polarizing. I mean, I've seen people who hate it too, but it seems like for most of the fan base, at least sort of the online fan base, that this is a really treasured album and sort of, I guess, like a cult classic album status.
Yeah, I'm really happy about that. I guess that the internet allowed these people to gather together and create websites and discuss lyrics. Because yes, it might not have been as popular as some of the other albums. So just bringing these people together who love A Passion Play would be a slightly more difficult task in offline space.
Right. Before we get into the album, I just want to mention the member lineup real quick. So this is kind of the first time where we moved into a sort of static lineup that the band had for a while, where most people refer to this as, the Jeffrey lineup, where we had on vocals, flute, acoustic guitar, and saxophone on this album, Ian Anderson, Martin Barr on electric guitar, Jeffrey Hammond on bass, Barry Barlow on drums, and John Evans on keyboards. And this is a member lineup which doesn't change for a couple more years up until 75. So it's kind of interesting how it took them this long to have kind of a static, concrete lineup, even just for a couple years.
I think part of the lineup of this album is still Dee Palmer on the orchestral arrangement.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just the Hare, because I may be criminally inattentive, but I don't think there is orchestra in the rest of the album.
I don't remember any, but could be wrong.
Yeah, but Hare is obviously where Dee Palmer made the arrangement.
Two things in particular I want to mention on just sort of the individual instruments. This is, I think, pre-1980. This was the one Tull album where keyboards were most important, it seems to me. There's a lot of keyboard on this album. There's a lot of synth on this album, which I think is actually pretty awesome, especially for an early 70s album. And for Jethro Tull, which at this point was not at all a band that was known for using synthesizers. But there's a lot of really impressive sound design on this album using synths.
Yeah, absolutely. The host of different thin synth textures on this one is kind of unparalleled in the Tull discography, even in the 80s.
Yeah.
The synths are kind of Emerson-y in some places with the kind of tone that they achieved. It's pretty awesome.
And then just this last thing I want to mention is the drums, where I don't really know what the cause of this is, but I guess it's mixing. I'm not really sure, but for whatever reason, Barry's drums on this album have never really stuck in my mind much, and I'm not really sure why. If you compare it to Thick as a Brick, I think there's some seminal drum work on Thick as a Brick, stuff that's really iconic drum parts that really stick in your mind, even if you're not a drummer or not really paying attention actively to the drums. For whatever reason, on Passion Play, even in the Steve Wilson mix, which I think the Steve Wilson mix fixed this a little bit, but it's still kind of an issue. For whatever reason, the drums just kind of feel like they're in the background to me. They never really feel like they come to the forefront that much. And I wish I could sort of explain more why, but do you know what I mean?
They do, yeah. They feel like they have been recorded sort of a little flat. And there was some feedback about that from Barry in the Steven Wilson booklet, where he said that during the Chateau sessions, he felt, and everyone felt, that his playing was really busy, and he kind of overworked his parts. So when it came to the recording of A Passion Play, he dialed down his parts, made them like more sparse, and just possibly, because I seem to remember that the recording of A Passion Play was somewhat rushed.
Yeah, it was very fast.
He didn't get as comfortable with the sparse arrangement and didn't quite probably make it his own and play it with enough fire to make it pop out.
Yeah, I suppose that's what it is. I just know for years and years it's always been weird to me how for some reason the drums just don't stick out on this album, and it's kind of a shame because the parts that are being played are pretty cool. Something about them they just don't stick out much.
Yeah, there's very little tone in the drums and in the toms, from what I hear.
Yeah.
Even compared to the regularly quite dull and muffled Tull drum sound. Dull in a good way.
Not Jethro dull.
Yeah.
So again, a little bit like Thick as a Brick, there's not a great way to move through this because even though they're separated into tracks on the Steve Wilson mix, the album was of course originally released as just part 1 and part 2. That being said, the track listing that is on the Steve Wilson remix was actually created by Ian, and if I remember the story right, was presented on radio copies in 1973. So in that sense, it's kind of an original structure created for the album, and so that's what we're going to be following as it makes the most sense.
Yeah, I think it was already released as this track list on the MFSL version in 98.
Yeah.
Or with similar names. I think same breakdown, but maybe slightly different names. I may be mistaken.
So we start off with Lifebeats and Prelude. So I remember these at some point being separate tracks, but on the Steve Wilson mix, they're combined into one. The thing that, of course, is most apparent with this one is just the synths at the beginning, which is a really crazy way to begin an album, I think, in 1973, especially for Jethro Tull.
Do you mean the heartbeat or just the tunes that swirl around it?
Just in general, the whole build up to the Prelude.
Yeah, it's very psychedelic in a way.
Yeah.
Which very, very much fits the story, because we are transported to an after-death experience, even though we don't know it yet, because the lyrics haven't started. This
whole Prelude up until the lyrics start, to me, it's very clearly, it's a musical representation of a person's life.
Yeah.
So the life beats part is birth, and I sort of see that as, coming out of the womb, as that part with all the synths and that kind of thing. Then the sort of prelude when the rest of the band comes in is the rest of the person's life. And then we kind of end with old age, which is sort of the whistling. And then we end with finally the collapse, which is the death.
Yeah, it makes sense. Of course, this is a part of music that has been reworked from the Shadow sessions, where it was called either Tiger Tune or Lore of the Bungle.
Yeah, I remember that.
Depending on whether it was the instrumental or the vocal version. And what I love about it is there's a note there in the arrangement, in the melody, that wasn't present in the Chateau version, where the melody kind of ends on a very unexpected note. And it's new from the perspective of the development of this track from Chateau to A Passion Play. And I love that note.
I'm not that familiar with the Chateau stuff, so off the top of my head, I can't picture what you mean, but I'll go back and listen to it. So one thing I noticed in the Steve Wilson mix is at the very end, there's a little hi-hat rattle, which is taken out. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, I need to check that again, because in my comparison, I was more focused on the saxophone parts. And of course, you as a drummer will have noticed the hi-hat.
It's right before the heartbeat dies. There's a little sort of keyboard part that's going doo 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 doo. And on the original mix, unless I'm making this up, maybe I am, but I pretty clearly remember there was hi-hat rattle along with that keyboard part, that doo doo, and that's gone in the Steve Wilson mix for whatever reason.
Yeah, I can't really explain that. What choice went into that?
I love this intro though. I think it's a fantastic intro.
I love this melody.
Yeah.
And the way the theme is established and developed, and it's very kind of a classical overture structure. We are brought in a whirlwind that sucks us into the album.
The critical issues with this album, according to music critics at the time, was a lot of them felt it was too pretentious and sort of trying to be too over the top. And I guess I can kind of see that with, this Tiger Tune part, if we want to call it that, where it's very carnival-like. And I guess if you're not really looking for that kind of thing, it can be kind of off-putting, especially at the very beginning of the album. But, to me, I don't know. I like it. I think it fits. I mean, it's supposed to be representing life, and life is a circus, if nothing else. So
yeah, I completely agree with that. I can't really see I'm not sure that this would be like the breaking point for people who heard that and thought, oh, pretentious.
Yeah, sure.
I believe it would be some parts in the rest of the album, because this is a fantastic beginning.
Yeah, I agree.
And it has a great emotional impact and provides a great contrast to the lyrical theme that begins in the next track.
So we go to track 2, the Silver Chord.
Still see me even here, The silver cord lies on
The silver chord, and we're starting on the story
Yeah.
in the album. And well, right from the theater program and from the very first line, we understand that this is a story about a person who has just died. Because, well, it's spelled out for us, and the meaning of the silver cord, which connects the body with the soul, is pretty transparent in this. And I think Ian has explained it as this person, that Ronnie, was killed in an accident in the Fulham Road. But among people who interpreted it, I think more people feel like the Fulham Road is where the cemetery is. And I think people even checked and confirmed that there are a couple cemeteries in the Fulham Road. So the rush along the Fulham Road would be sort of the kind of maybe a traffic jam where why everyone was late to the funeral, although their taxis came too late. And the hush is the moment of silence as people see Ronnie to the afterlife.
Yeah, I also thought of it as the hush of death, of life ending.
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning, we were talking about this before we started recording, but there's an old school Tull fan site called the Ministry of Information, which maybe some people listening are familiar with that. But they have a great page dedicated to the meaning and story of Passion Play, where they have, it's kind of like what Genius was before Genius, I guess, where they have kind of the full lyrics of the album printed with annotated lyrics trying to explain the story and stuff. And so I think a lot of what we're talking about today is going to be quite inspired by what's written there.
Yeah, I have perused that website to a great extent in preparation for this episode, and so I'm familiar with the discourse around certain parts that are interpreted in various ways. In this song, I like how the same kind of melody is delivered with a backdrop of different instruments, where the piano replaces the acoustic guitar and create development. It basically creates development as the melody does not change. And it's a very orchestral way of approaching music, I feel.
Yeah.
Where themes are repeated across different sections of different instrumental sections, letting us look at the melody as interpreted by a different instrument, a different timbre. There's a couple of jokes. I think there's one joke on the line that come crowding in a different key. There's a chord from a different key that follows it. We've been in C major, and there's C minor.
Yeah, that sounds
just for a second there.
I think I noticed that even as a kid who didn't even really understand what key was.
But also, they didn't go too far, which I kind of applaud, and there is no dissonance on the line melodies decaying in sweet dissonance.
Yeah, that'd be kind of hard. Yeah, one thing that two things really that stick out to me for this track in particular. From the very beginning, it sounds like an onstage monologue, where I feel like you can kind of imagine it's sort of an actor on the stage with one spotlight on him, and that's kind of the beginning of kind of the more operatic, story part of the album. And then second is kind of the placemaking, I guess, which is kind of funny, because in a song which is sort of as sparse as this one is at times, it'd be a little weird to think about how it makes a place, but I think it kind of does in the lyrics, where it talks a lot about a desert sort of being on the sands, and that's a really interesting way of visualizing limbo, just because I never really imagined limbo being a place like that, but it's kind of interesting, and you can kind of see the sparseness of that place that's being described.
Yeah, well, I think I have come across the descriptions of limbo as an endless desert where you're escorted by death, even in works like, I don't know, Terry Pratchett.
Oh, Discworld, yeah. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Yeah, I'm kind of a fan. One of the places where the saxophone is notably missing is, it's not already the silver chord, it's the very beginning of the reassuring tune, a short section that connects the silver chord with Memory Bank.
Yeah.
But just before the organ starts, there's an acoustic guitar line, and in the original mix there's a little bit of saxophone flourish in the very background. It's kind of tinny, as in it's not a solo part, but it's not there on Wilson.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the exact same thing we're talking about, but there's a change I noticed in the Steve Wilson mix where the keyboard sound is very different on this track, and it was immediately apparent to me as someone who's familiar with the original mix that They took some of the, I don't know what the proper term would be, but it sounds more of a normal organ as opposed to having some kind of effect on it.
Yeah, and the panning after the little organ part, the panning on the guitars, is very much more prominent in the Wilson mix, and also feels sort of jarring to me a little bit, where the one guitar is very much in one ear and the other part comes from the opposite side, as opposed to in the original mix them being closer together.
Yeah, I noticed that also.
Yeah, and I really kind of struggle to explain why the choice was made to make it like that.
One thing I like a lot about this one is the electric guitar during the quieter parts. It's very ethereal and sort of far off, and I think it sounds really good.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting how it moves from one side to the other. And in the Angel section, and Who Comes Here to Wish Me Well, the electric guitar moves to the left. And even though it kind of plays the same part as it did before, but it feels more prominent, and it feels like the leitmotif of the Angel. I don't know if that makes sense, but kind of feels like a narrative element to me.
I didn't notice it moving before. That's interesting.
It does. It does that from the original mix onwards.
I always wondered who the guys taking him in leather bound are. Like, are those supposed to be angels of heaven? Are they servants of limbo? I always thought that was
very controversial line on the Ministry of Information website, because it's not entirely clear who's bound in leather or even what's bound in leather, because it can be interpreted as Ronnie is bound in leather and is forcefully taken by this band of gentlemen, or that the band of gentlemen in leather bound is the Bible, and he is escorted by the Bible towards wherever he goes next. Which is kind of a tenuous explanation to me, if you ask me, but it's interesting how it can be looked in so many different ways.
Yeah. I always just saw it as the surface reading of him being taken and leather bound, but what do I know?
Well, yeah, and no one but someone to be found. What do you think of that?
My guess is it's just wordplay. I don't know if there's a lot of meaning in it, but no one but someone to be found. I don't see a lot of meaning in it, but I could be very well wrong. I think it's just wordplay.
Could be, yeah, or could be a view of a dead person who is in that state, no one, but they have been found by these people who are taking them to the court, as it were.
But it makes me wonder, where are the other souls in limbo?
You never see that. Well, in Dante's Inferno, you do see the other souls in limbo, but there is a view of the limbo as being an individual space. It's empty for whoever ends up there. It's just them and eternity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And emptiness. No matter that thousands upon thousands, millions of people are dying every moment.
So we go on to Reassuring Tune. I mean, I don't really have much to say on this one, do you?
Well, I think we talked about it already, about the missing sax part and the panning on the acoustic guitar.
Yeah, it's quite short. There's not a lot to it. I think not a lot to really discuss.
Yeah, it's a great transition.
Yeah, I like it.
So Memory Bank.
Memory Bank. So there's a lot to talk about in this one specifically, and I think this is where we get to one of the first major set pieces of the story, which is sort of the memory bank, which I guess in kind of Tull fashion, it's not described perfectly well. Like there's still a lot left to imagination, but there's still enough described to where you sort of get the idea of what its function is. Where it's essentially a observation room, a cinema, movie theater, to have your life viewed and judged, to determine whether you get into heaven or not. And so I guess at this point it's still sort of a space which is existing in sort of a limbo type space.
Well, yeah, adjacent to the limbo type space.
Yeah.
Because it's very populated, as we can see, with all those entities that are judging the person's life.
It's very interesting to me how it's described as icy wastes. How, again, we're going from the desert to the icy waste. It's kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah, and it is also a very controversial line, because the imagery that all along the icy wastes there are faces smiling in the gloom is, well, it's too reminiscent of Dante's Inferno, of the ninth circle of hell, where there are sinners frozen in ice. But we are not in hell. We are very far from hell at this moment. Is it a view of things to come, a kind of a pretentious image that looms in the distance? I don't know. It's very difficult to explain.
Mm-hmm. But I love the way that he's placemaking here, and it's kind of impressive to me how he's able to do that even on songs like this.
Yeah, and we also get kind of a feeling of carnival of all these people. Well, call them people who are judging him, and all this cinema setting. It feels an odd word to use in this context, but it kind of feels staged. It feels like all of these entities are creating this spectacle of the viewing for him. Because you've got the roll up, roll down, which is just like a carnival phrase, roll up, and he's being guided very enthusiastically, and he's being addressed directly as if the viewer, in this case, is being the center of everyone's attention, not just on the screen, but in the audience as well. I don't think I'm making a ton of sense, but it feels like this whole experience of judging a person's life projected onto a cinema screen is constructed to impress that person as well.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
To kind of impress a feeling of the importance of this event.
Yeah.
Of how grand this kind of judgment should feel, while it probably isn't.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Especially the roll up, roll down part is interesting because I've actually never thought of it in a carnival way before. I remember on the Ministry of Information side there is a suggestion that it could be about a needle being applied, which I don't think that's what it is, because as the site mentions, Ian wasn't a drug person and likely wouldn't write about something like that. For whatever reason, that image has always stuck in my mind when I hear that line.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the other explanation from there is that it's the carnival phrase roll up, but it's also kind of oxymoronized in the vein of the song Left Right, where you have opposites played around with.
Yeah.
And the ice cream lady, also a very interesting line that's explained in a host of different ways in the fandom. What do you think of that?
So this is the wetter drawers to see you in the Passion Play?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any. I've been trying to figure that one out since I was a kid. I don't know if there's much I can add. Yeah,
well, there are, one of the explanations is that the ice cream lady is Ronnie's mother, and wet her drawers is a reference to her waters breaking to see him in the Passion Play, i.e. to escort him into life.
Yeah.
But also just in this build-up of excitement, it can be just a reference to the cinema being a very real cinema, even with an ice cream lady, who is so excited to see the spectacle that she wet her drawers.
Yeah, that's what I've always sort of viewed it as. Although, I don't think there's any correct interpretation or anything.
Yeah, because there's a different lady down the line in the final part of the album, and who is a much more kind of unambiguously a metaphor for a mother bearing a child.
Yeah.
So, well, I don't think we can have a definitive explanation of it being the mother or not being the mother.
So we're talking a lot about lyrics because there's a lot to unpack lyrically on this album, but just one musical thing I want to mention here is I noticed the other day when I was listening that there's quite a lot of double bass happening on the drums, and I think, I could be wrong, but I think this is the first time Barry uses double bass, because I don't remember there being any double bass on Thick as a Brick. So that's just kind of one interesting drum thing to note. I think a lot of Tull fans don't even really realize this, but Barry used quite a lot of double bass in the mid 70s and even kind of going into the late 70s a bit. So I think this is the first usage of that by Barry.
Well, yeah, I remember very clearly a lot of double bass on, I think, Dark Ages on Stormwatch. So yeah, very much until the end.
Minstrel in the Gallery has a lot as well.
On the videos and photos of concerts from that period, you can see him with two bass drums. In this section, we are getting our first odd time signature, which is 11. Quite exciting.
Which part is that?
In my view. I think it's somewhere around, oddly, around the 11th minute.
Oh.
I didn't write down a timestamp, but in my notes I wrote down 11:08. After it's right after the ice cream lady
Okay.
part.
I always thought the "Here's Your ID" part was kind of random, how it just kind of comes in real quick. It sounds very different from what comes around it.
Yeah, there are a number of lines, I think, in the lyrics that are there just for the sake of wordplay.
Yeah, I agree.
And just confusing. Well, we are confused, but part of the, story-wise, part of the objective of this whole judgment scene is to confuse Ronnie. So we are very much on the same page with him.
Yeah. So track 5, Best Friends. So this is sort of the viewing of the actual film, I guess, of Ronnie's life, which is quite interesting. I don't have a lot really to say lyrically. I think a lot of it, if you're listening to the album, it's decently understood a lot of what's going on. I think there's things about something about playing cricket and things about being someone who speaks in public a lot. So it sounds like Ronnie was someone of high society, maybe.
Yeah, and like a well-connected person. The line about the best friends' telephones.
Yeah.
But it also kind of speaks to to Ronnie's experience during the viewing, because I think the old umbrella, does it have a nasty terror in the dome, is a reference to his state and his a desire to retreat while being confronted with the entirety of his life.
I see a lot of it as taunting, and even the line about best friends' telephones never cooled from the heat of your hands is almost kind of like making fun of him in the way that, they're trying to plant the seed that he was annoying to people, to his friends, and that kind of thing.
Absolutely, it does. It completely feels like that, because then they start bombarding him with questions in the next song.
Yeah, musically, I think it's interesting. The very end of Best Friends has the first instance of the little piece which bookends the first and last sides of the album. The da 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 da. That's kind of the first time you find that motif.
Yeah, again, a very symphonic, orchestral approach. And yeah, it kind of transitions to Critique Oblique through chaos.
Right.
Don't have really much to say musically about that, but it again, like the intro and like many other parts, guides us through the emotional experience.
Yeah.
Makes us feel kind of the story viscerally.
Right. Yeah. I think that visceral is a good way of putting it, where it's very taunting in a way which I think it's kind of interesting to imagine. I don't know if this would be angels who would be conducting this kind of thing, but it's interesting to imagine them as being that way.
Well, yeah, this is not a generous view of angels, but who knows?
So we get into a Critique Oblique.
Yeah, an older track, because again, this one was conceived in the Chateau sessions, I think, pretty much in its entirety. And I don't know, probably one of my favorite places in the album, if there is such thing as a favorite place in this album for me.
Yeah.
But it's kind of different from what led up to it, which makes it kind of a point of focus, because it's a more slow-paced melody, which makes us focus on the lyrics even more.
Yeah.
And kind of pins Ronnie down together with us and starts interrogating.
Yeah, it's interrogation, and it's also sort of building the tension of whether he's going to be passed or not to get into heaven, which is then kind of resolved at the very end. I think this Critique Oblique, I think, is probably one of the most well-known parts of the album, I think it'd be fair to say that.
Because it's very, very easy to kind of edit it out into a separate song. Yeah. Which it was originally, so probably stands to reason.
Did you see Ian on the Homo Eroticus tour?
No.
I was able to see him on that, and I remember he played this song, which I was really surprised by. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, I think he played parts of A Passion Play on the last tour. I saw him in Kiev. But yeah, also worth noting that this part, most of it is in 4/4. But there are a couple of odd breaks. I didn't really place them in terms of specific time signature, but it inserts enough of odd bars to keep us on the edge.
Yeah.
And the song, as it begins, I like how it sort of breaks out of the dissonance, because there's an organ cluster being played, and the groove of the song just cracks it open and drives forward.
Yeah.
It's a great place.
One thing I really love about it is the very fast muted guitar strumming, which I don't know if a guitarist could tell me if there's a more technical term for that, but I love the little tick-a-tick-a. They're really awesome throughout the track. Also, really great lyrics in this part especially, and I really love towards the end the lyric about now that you've lost a skin or two with you're for us and we're for you.
Right before I know you've lost a skin or two, there is what feels to me a completely hilarious synth part, which I love. But a lot of synths on this album are slightly on the edge of being goofy, which kind of adds to my confusion as why everyone thinks this album is so overly the top serious. Because come on, there are so many squawks.
Yeah, I definitely think, like, I would say it's in general a serious album, but it clearly has a more lighthearted feel than Thick as a Brick did.
Especially towards the music.
Yeah.
Because lyrically, we're kind of always in a preoccupied place. But the music is all over the place in a good sense, as it's very playful, and there's a lot of humor in it. Feels to me.
And then towards the end in the story, at the end of this track, man of passion rise again, we won't cross you out, for we do love you like a son, of that there's no doubt. And so he's let into heaven, despite whatever troubles he may have had in life, as most people would.
And despite that, he's absolutely awful, as stated plainly.
Oh, right, yeah, to tell you how absolutely awful you are. I think that's kind of an interesting line, because it's kind of a moment of introspection among whoever this being is who's judging them, whether it's angels or whatever, kind of talking about their role in existence is to try to convince people how awful they are.
Do you think it's introspection or just more ribbing?
I think it's both, really, but I mean, I think it's true, but I think it's also kind of a recognition that, we know that no matter how good or bad you are, our job at the end of the day is basically to make people question and realize how terrible they were in life.
And that it is also a spectacle.
Yeah. Forest Dance number 1. So this is the two forest dances are actually one of my favorite parts on the album by far. What do you think?
Yeah, they're wonderful. They give a kind of a psychedelic feeling to the space we're in.
And it's not something that Tull really does again in the rest of their discography to this extent. And so in that respect, I think that these two little snippets are very sort of overlooked parts of the Tull material.
Well, they feel folky. I think the name Forest Dance, even though it might have been named that after the fact, we don't really know. So they do have a kind of a later folk music Tull feeling to them.
Yeah.
But they're delivered in a very different manner. Lots of effects, lots of delays, and just kind of ambient music, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sounds it sounds like Brian Eno type stuff. It's pretty interesting.
It's a shame that they're so short, and short and consisting of basically a single theme.
Yeah.
So we can't really talk a lot about it, but these are wonderful, wonderful places in the album.
I mentioned earlier the sound design on this album, and you have the heartbeat coming back here, and the heartbeat is present whenever the character transitions between states in the afterlife. So you have...
Yeah, interesting. Do we have the heartbeat between heaven and hell?
Well, you have the heartbeat at the beginning of Overseer Overture, so...
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I never thought about it like that. That the heartbeat is the transition, is the mark of the character's presence.
And so I think
that's kind of cool.
What these at least the first, or well, I guess both of them, the forest dances are supposed to symbolize as sort of the ascension to heaven, is how I view it. It's kind of, and that's kind of what it sounds like to me. I mean, it sounds like it's an audio representation of what that would be like or feel like.
Yeah, it kind of climbs and doesn't climb at the same time. I wouldn't call it like a shepherd tone, because that's a very technical way of creating a climb that continuously climbs, but it kind of has a similar effect as a shepherd tone would have.
Yeah.
If anyone is not really familiar with the shepherd tone, I'm not going to go into the detail of explaining it here, but you can Google it, and I promise it's fascinating.
So then at the end, we kind of come to the climax where we go back to the da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Mm-hmm.
And then we come into the story of the hare who lost his spectacles.
This is the story of the hare who lost his spectacles.
Yeah, the introduction by John Evan. I think the story is read by Jeffrey, but the introduction, this is the story, is John Evan, and it gets me every time. The delivery on that is absolutely gold.
Yeah, this is something that from the very beginning of this podcast, I've been very excited to discuss this part. So there's a lot. I guess there's a lot we can unpack here. I think most Tull fans probably understand what the point of this is supposed to be, if there is supposed to be a point, is that it's the intermission in the play. And so that's why it sounds completely out of nowhere and is totally unrelated. But to me, it's always been a stroke of genius how they did this, even though I know for a lot of people it may just seem like childish nonsense. But I don't know. I admire it. I think it's cool. I think it's funny.
Yeah, I've loved it from the first time that I heard this album. I know it's a very controversial part, and to this day there are people who can't stand it or even skip it. But I couldn't imagine going through a Passion Play skipping it, because first of all, to me, a Passion Play is an incredibly emotional album. It's a very emotional experience, and having this in the middle gives me a kind of a breather.
Yeah,
it gives me time to prepare myself for what comes next. And in terms of humor, I think it's hilarious. I think it's, from the very first time, it kind of reminded me of like kids' records that I used to have when I was very little, with the musical tales, like radio plays but on records. I don't know if that is a popular format around the world, but I had like dozens of these, and they were instrumentated and orchestrated in a very similar way. They would never have like rock music on them or anything. It would just be a narrator, a couple of characters, and an orchestra punctuating the story.
Yeah,
and it always felt like this to me.
I guess that's what they're based on.
There's a lot of course, allusions to Winnie the Pooh in terms of the characters, or Lewis Carroll in terms of absurdity, which are also two of the books I loved very much.
Yeah, Winnie the Pooh comes in my mind a lot when I think of this story, and I always kind of wondered about that. I don't think the Disney version of Winnie the Pooh had come out yet at this point. I think it was still a couple of years away, but I mean, of course it could be based on the actual stories. Yeah,
of course it would have been based on the actual books, because, well, the books Winnie the Pooh consists of two books, so I say books. The book is kind of very absurd in its own way.
Yeah.
But of course, Hare gives it a children's animal story, completely out of left field, absurd twist that you won't find in Winnie the Pooh.
I think it's great also that it's done by Jeffrey Hammond, just in the sense that Jeffrey is somewhat of a reclusive character in kind of Tull history, I guess. He's not somebody who has ever really, I think, been very open about discussing his role in the band. Not that he's like totally reclusive or anything. I mean, he's showed up occasionally in interviews and stuff, but for him, I think it's been pretty clear that he isn't really interested in being thought of as a musician, and he views Jethro Tull very much in the past tense as just a very small part of his life. So all I'm saying is that this is kind of a way of Tull fans to get to know Jeffrey a little more. I think this is one of the biggest instances where he's sort of at the forefront in the time he was in the band, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, to hear his voice, because I know that the Lancashire accent it's delivered in, he exaggerated it.
Yeah.
But the kind of funny thing, because when I first listened to this album, I wasn't really much of an expert on different accents of English, British or American or otherwise. But the way this story was delivered, I didn't know it was Jeffrey, that is what the Lancashire accent. I thought that this what a posh British accent was supposed to sound like, which I know now it doesn't.
Yeah.
But it feels funny to me now. And yeah, as we mentioned before, this, I think, is the moment on the album where De Palma is appearing as the arranger, because we've got a lot of the orchestra, which also, I don't know, feels wonderful, especially probably for me, the first half. The half of the Hare on side A of the record. I don't know if you know that, but actually the story of the Hare is split in two on two different sides.
I was going to ask that because I'd always
Yeah.
wondered which side of the album this was on, but I had no
Both.
idea it was split in the middle. So where is the split?
Yeah, I think right before Presently the Moon appeared from behind the clouds.
Huh, that's interesting.
I think this is what the side B begins with.
Well, that's crazy. I mean, that's a crazy way to split the album. Like that's a really bold decision.
Yeah. Well, it kind of gives you the time to digest what just happened.
Yeah.
That we've transitioned from a rock album to a children's play.
So it's worth mentioning there's a video for this, which I think most Tull fans have probably seen this already and probably know what this is, but just in case. It was filmed for the live performances for the tour because they did the entire album on tour, which was kind of polarizing, I think, at the time. And they made a lot of use of projections and video imagery and stuff, which was quite novel at the time. And so during the Hare was just played on tape. It wasn't live, as far as I know. And so they filmed this sort of video for that section to play while the band was off stage. And you can find it on YouTube. It was released, I think, with the 2003 remaster. But if you haven't seen it, you should watch it right away because it's extremely entertaining.
Yeah, definitely. Not a definitive experience for this album, but probably explains the lightheartedness that came into making this.
Yeah.
I don't think the text of the story has a lot to be discussed. Besides, I don't know, the animal puns and things like that.
Yeah,
one line kind of strikes me as interesting. Why is the Hare trembling with excitement?
Yeah, I've always wondered that too, because that always seemed a little odd. But I just assumed it's just part of the absurdity is that he's excited by being helpless or something.
Possibly, but look at it like that. We have, in an abstract way, in the story of the Hare, we have a character who is passive, who is helpless, and who is surrounded by people who are judging him. So very much not unlike what we just went through in the Memory Bank / Critique Oblique section. And the excitement kind of puts me in mind of that the main character, who is in this case the Hare, is awaiting what comes next for him in his life. And that the judgment that happens around to him ends up completely inconsequential because no one actually knows what they're talking about. And this may kind of give a perspective on that the judgment that just occurred with Ronnie had actually nothing to do with him per se, with him as a person stripped down to his very essence. All of that was not what he is.
Yeah, I've definitely never thought of it that way. Could very well be.
I think I just came up with that. I had it kind of swirling around in my mind, but I didn't put it together this way before now. So I think it kind of works.
Yeah. I'd be surprised if there was a connection, but who knows?
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of interpretation.
Yeah. It took me a long time to actually notice the animal puns. Like, I think it was years before I noticed them, but they're pretty clever.
I think, well, I definitely noticed you kangaroo at the very start. It's pretty obvious. I never noticed before reading the commentary that B began.
B began.
Yeah, B wanted to help, and thinking he had the answer, began.
Okay, I still had
began.
missed that one until today.
Yeah,
So.
well, it's not obvious, and I'm not sure if that is supposed to be a pun or just a coincidence.
I love at the end how so Jeffrey starts singing, which is cute to me, and then kind of Martin and Barry suddenly come in, and it turns into a hard rock song for a couple seconds.
Yeah, and a pair in the end. I think I saw some people say on the internet that kind of the last line is what makes it funny, but I'm not sure what the significance of that would be.
It just sounds funny. That's all it is, I think.
It does sound funny, yeah. But I think the rest of it was funny already.
One thing I noticed in the Steve Wilson mix, which I very clearly remember that after he says a B, there's a little pause, and then there's some synths playing for a couple seconds, and this was taken out in the Steve Wilson mix. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think I do. I didn't make a note of that, but I think I'm recalling it.
Yeah, and I was sad to see that go, because I felt like it was very strange the way it played, because there's a very clear and jarring pause, and then there's some synths played for a couple seconds, and then another pause, and then the narration starts again. But it was kind of odd the way it was done, and I always saw it as the synths were sort of like the bee flying away off the bush or whatever, and I was sad they took that out.
Yeah, I saw people comparing this part to Peter and the Wolf, in that the different instruments are supposed to represent different animals, so it would make sense that it was kind of a representation of the movement of a bee.
Yeah. So we go into Forest Dance number 2, which is, much the same as the first one, just faster. It's worth mentioning that this Forest Dance number 2 was also in the Hare video. That's the end of the Hare video. And there's a really funny scene where Jeffrey is dressed as a devil, and all the animals in the cast from the Hare are sort of like dancing around him like a maypole or something. It's pretty interesting.
Primitive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this Forest Dance is just a slightly faster development of Forest Dance number 2. So musically, there isn't a lot to be said about that. But I'm very pleased that it's there and giving us another one of those ambient Brian Eno-ish moments.
Yeah, and it's the only thing I had written in my notes on this is that musically, the very end of this section, that same passage also appears later in Overture.
Yes, and it kind of plays the same role as the little end passage on side A.
Yeah. Like
the ta-tum. And so on side B we have a different musical motif that is used in the same function. Track 10, The Foot of Our Stairs.
We sleep by the ever-bright hole in the door. Eat in the corner, talk to the floor.
I like how again, we're getting the same tune played on different instruments and providing a dynamic development of the same musical material. So we begin on a very soft acoustic guitar in the first verse, then we have 2 verses with organ, drums, bass, and electric guitar, just a little of it. And then, again, a very loud acoustic guitar that's kind of mic'd closer. And it's interesting how the acoustic guitar in the 4th verse sounds more forceful than the section with drums and bass that we just had.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite parts of the album, this section.
Yeah, I think, I absolutely love it. And in the Jackrabbit Mister section of it, this is my kind of goosebumps moment number 1, major one on the album. I absolutely love when that part comes in.
Yeah, I agree. So story-wise, I think it's worth noting that there seems to be a time skip here between side 1 and side 2, where this Foot of Our Stairs takes place in heaven, and it seems like there's been at least a bit of time that's passed to enough where the protagonist gets sort of bored of heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a sometime later moment. The line "the foot of our stairs" is interesting, because I never knew that. I think I found it on the ministry website that it's an expression. "I'll go to the foot of our stairs" is a British expression similar to "well, slap my ass and call me Sally," or "well, I'll be damned," which is sort of interesting because if we think about what's going on there, that the protagonist wants to descend into hell. Well, first, he is going to the foot of the proverbial stairs that connect the 2 afterlives. And also, if we replace "I'll go to the foot of our stairs" with "I'll be damned," it works as well.
Yeah.
Because he's going into hell, he's going to be damned. So kind of an interesting way to look at it.
I never knew that about the British phrase. If I ever read that, I forgot it, so that's interesting.
A lot of things to unpack here in the lyrics, like the spiders, the explanation of who the spiders are. I think there exists an explanation that the spiders, people on Earth who pray, this is why they bended the knees. But I'm really not sure. Do people on Earth pray to people in the afterlife? I don't think they do.
Yeah, I don't know. Praying to angels, praying to relatives.
Maybe, yeah, maybe that.
I've never...
But it's kind of odd because we've got spiders and later we'll have flies.
Yeah.
So there's an insect theme going on.
I've never
Or
made
not
that
insect,
connection. I think it's interesting how there's no placemaking, so to speak, in this section where you'd think he would talk a bit more about what heaven looks like or what it's like, but he doesn't do that. And I kind of wonder if it's on purpose, because a lot of the imagery in this section about the foot of our stairs and the spiders and the old ladies talk and all that kind of thing, it makes me imagine where this is taking place as a very old, dreary, dusty, sort of old house is the way that I picture this. And it's interesting that that's kind of how he paints heaven, because that's what someone who is bored of it would probably see it as.
You know what? I have just had a thought. This is new. Probably a 10 years connection, but hey, let's throw it in there. I don't remember which book that was in, which I'm supposed to know because I'm supposed to have read it in school, but I don't really remember. So in the work of Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky, there's a phrase that eternity is a small dusty room with spiders in it.
I've never heard of it. No idea.
Yeah, I don't really remember where that was. Was that an Idiot or another work by him, or Brothers Karamazov? I'm really not sure because I don't really like Dostoevsky, but that's a famous phrase, and well, we have an eternity here, which somehow contains spiders. So it's unintentional, I'm sure, but it's kind of an interesting image.
Yeah, who knows?
Right, so should we address the elephant in the room?
Yeah, the new verse.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you ask my opinion about it, I don't feel strongly about it. Again, the fact that Ian approved it kind of soothes it over for me. If Ian wasn't involved, I would be mad about it. But I think it takes away a little bit from the previous mix. I probably prefer it not be there, but it doesn't really bother me that much. What do you think?
Well, it does bother me.
Okay.
Sorry about that. In the Wilson liner notes, Wilson says, I played it to Ian, who couldn't remember why it had been removed, but had no objection to its being restored. Well, I think I have an idea why it was removed. First of all, to me it sounds like in this section the band is not really playing together. Everyone's kind of in a different groove. The drums don't really carry the momentum forward. The rest of the melody is not really playing with the drums. And to me, the way this section is performed is a little bit uninspired, and to me it completely kills the momentum of the piece. So I'm kind of salty about that, because I think it was removed because the song sounds better without it, because the development is much more clear, and the instrumental part that comes on after it is a better succession than the gypsy verse. So I'm a little bit torn, because when I first heard this remix, and I had no prior information to that, so when I heard this section, I thought, whoa, yeah, this is fantastic. More Passion Play, yes, please. But so I would like to have the Foot of Our Stairs extended mix as a bonus track, but not in the midst of the album itself, because it kind of stops everything. Because if you compare the drum part that the new section begins with to the drum part in the instrumental bit that is the original follow-up, which comes on later, then the kind of the syncopation in the drums is very much out of place in the new verse. And this is what I feel kills the momentum and creates the kind of dip in the emotional state. I think the vocal delivery is also a little bit lacking in that it feels a little bit uninspired. So yeah, no. Much as I would love more Passion Play, this section I think was cut out rightly.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said. I think what I was trying to say earlier was that I think it does hamper the momentum a bit of this part, and that specifically the ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba-ba. I think the fact that that part is repeated more times kind of hurts a little bit, because I think it worked better and had more momentum when it was less frequent.
Yeah, it is a fascinating part, and kind of my life is richer now that I've heard it, and now that I know how the song sounded at one time. But it would work better as a bonus track.
Yeah, there's a really great Martin Barre guitar solo at the end. Best on the album, I think. And this is interesting, I'm interested to hear your opinion on this, but there's a part where they go into what sounds like the riff from Thick as a Brick at the end.
Ooh,
Have you ever thought of it that way? Yeah, it's not the exact same, but it's very similar to the See There a Sun or See There a Man is whatever.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, because I just had the playhead on this track quietly in my ears right at that spot. Yeah, maybe I haven't noticed it when I listened to both albums when I was a kid, because I kind of took them in as a whole. But yeah, it totally sounds like a cheeky quote.
Yeah.
And right after that part, speaking of it, there's a little phrase that leads into the quiet, there's a quiet break with a plucky synth.
Right, yeah.
Before the next section, after the guitar part. And that is where a new saxophone phrase has been added. There was no saxophone in that little phrase before the quiet break in the original mix.
I need to listen back to that, because I know exactly what part you're talking about, but I've never noticed anything different there.
Yeah, the one that dum ta da ta da ta dum. Yeah. So yeah, listen to that, and you will compare it to a different mix, and you will hear what I'm talking about.
But I always wondered if that Thick as a Brick riff was a direct quote or reference.
Must have been just different enough to remind us, but not to be a complete quote. And in the next part that comes, I think in the Wilson mix, the la la, the vocal accompaniment, it seems too loud to me. Just that little choir.
So Overseer Overture. This has always been a really interesting part of the album to me, just because of giving the vocal over to Satan, essentially, which is a really interesting idea, and I think it works quite well here.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the track split in this section, to be honest.
Oh yeah,
because I think that Well I'm All for Leaving and That Being Done kind of belongs to the Overseer part.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they kind of butchered the track splitting on this album, to be honest.
And Well I'm All for Leaving, I think this is my Goosebumps moment number 2. They are kind of packed tightly here, because when the Satan's part comes on, Colors I've None, this is where it feels like my goosebumps start growing goosebumps of their own, and basically I end up the emotional equivalent of Peter Gabriel in Slipperman costume. There's your horrifying image for the day. You're welcome.
I love a lot of the references to sort of classical literature and that kind of thing, like all the references to Paradise Lost and that kind of thing is really cool. Just because, I mean, how many references to Paradise Lost do you see in modern rock music and that kind of thing?
Well, yeah. And we've just imagined a reference to Dostoevsky, so...
Yeah, that's true. It's worth pointing out, too, that very first part, which on the Steve Wilson remix is on this track, Overseer Overture, which the track split is very annoying, because sometimes when I have my Tull library on shuffle, this song will play, and then it'll just come in, like, in the middle of that vocal, which is annoying. But that part is sung by God, is the way that I see it. So it's interesting how even God has a vocal line on this album.
Well, G. Oddie, he's a character in the theater program.
I love the again with the sound design is the guitar shrieking as you go down to hell is so awesome. The way they do that. I don't really know about the. I could do without the. I think that's that's a little annoying.
The vocal things.
Yeah, but the guitar screaming is really cool.
No, I think the oohs are cool as well, because again, it kind of takes the edge of it being serious, but still keeps it very emotional. And in the end of Overseer, there's an organ versus synth kind of part, and the synth sounds so gnarly.
Yeah, it does.
It's fantastic.
I've always wondered what the guitar sounding thing in the back is. I don't know what better way to describe that, but it...
You'll need to play it to me to point it out.
So at the very beginning, where during the Satan part, when it starts, in the back you can hear... It sounds kind of like acoustic mandolin-y, kind of.
The dun diddy diddy dun diddy diddy dun diddy diddy.
Yeah, I think so.
I feel this one is too loud on the Steven Wilson mix because it used to be a lot more buried and a lot more background, and I think that's where it belongs. I'm not sure. Yeah, it could be. I don't think Ian is credited with extra string instruments on this one.
Yeah, I don't think it's a
Correct me if I'm
mandolin, but
wrong.
it sounds kind of similar. It's under some kind of filter or something.
It could be just a guitar played pretty high.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. And there's also this vocal vibrato on the long notes, which I think is, again, it's a little too prominent in the new mix. Just a hair too loud, which is probably where I will stop being annoyed by the by the Steven Wilson remix. By the way, if we look at this melody from the point of like folk music, which it kind of resembles, this one is kind of a regular jig.
Yeah.
It's just takita tukita, where the prelude to the album, the Tiger tune, was a slip jig. It was like a regular jig, but it's got 3 groups of 3. The normal jig has 2 groups of 3, takita tukita tukita takita, and the slip jig is takita tukita tukita, takita tukita tukita, Rocky Road to Dublin, that sort of thing. So, like marches on Thick as a Brick, jigs on Passion Play play an important role.
I really like the different percussion that come in toward the end, where you have I don't know what the name of these instruments are, but the little clapper things that you hear in like Spanish music a lot. I like how they have
Castanets.
those. Yeah. It's just one of those things that it's just, I like how they had the thought to actually do that, just because I think a lot of bands wouldn't think to do something like that.
Yeah, it kind of increases the danceability of this section, as it were. So join round the maypole and dance, and everyone is actually dancing and clapping.
One thing in the lyrics that I want to know your opinion on, the line about legends were born surrounding mysterious lights seen in the sky flashing. Is that a reference to UFOs, you think?
Could be, yeah. There's also an explanation that this is kind of Satan bragging that it was him lighting a cigarette, but everyone thought it were mysterious lights in the sky.
Yeah, that's how I always saw it, is that a lot of what he's talking about here, I mean, he's talking about his involvement with humans, and I just kind of saw it as, different sightings of Satan people think are UFOs or aliens or whatever.
I like the phrase offering services for the saving of face, and the interpretation that is a reference to people blaming devil for their misdeeds. That's kind of the service that devil provides.
Yeah, given this command to watch over our miserable sphere, it kind of goes to the eternality of not just God, but of Satan also, how he was, even though he was fallen from grace, he was given the responsibility of watching over humanity and sort of the evil side of humanity.
Well, yeah. Have you seen Good Omens?
No.
The series based on Terry Pratchett's and Neil Gaiman's book Good Omens. This is very much kind of part of the story of a demon being assigned to the earth.
It's interesting that you're a Terry Pratchett fan. When I was a kid, I had a friend who was his whole family was super into Discworld, and so I read a couple of the books just from him. But I haven't thought about Discworld in so long. That's kind of like the last time I remember hearing about it.
That's kind of interesting. Yeah, I'm very much Pratchett kind of fan.
So we go into Flight from Lucifer.
Flee the icy Lucifer, oh, he's an awful fellow. What a mistake, I didn't take a feather.
Which this, for a long time, this was one of my favorite parts on the album by far, and I especially loved the jig at the end, which Tull fans might know, but this jig was actually played live for a while. I think in the 90s they played it, the Passion jig they called it. It was played at shows.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I didn't know that.
And so one really important thing that happens in this track, so I think it's kind of easy to understand, but in the story, this is the escape from hell, where the guy realizes that, well, maybe going to hell wasn't a great idea, so he sort of escapes. And it's never really explained how he does that, which is interesting, because I'd be interested to know how you escape from hell.
Well, I think, yeah, it makes sense that he first escapes from hell and then ends up in what's referred to in the program Magus Perdé's drawing room at midnight.
Yeah.
So this is not in hell. This is elsewhere.
Yeah. And I have a lot more to say about Magus Perdé, but I'll wait till we get to the track of that.
We'll come to that.
Yeah.
In Flight from Lucifer, this is one of the places I think that that the synth sound like a little bit like Keith Emerson in the beginning, where you have the synth and organ intro.
Yeah.
It's very much a kind of gnarly Emerson's kind of sound. And another thing about the synth on this track, like there's a kind of a punctuation in after certain lines, which partly is done by the drums, and in the line barking up the wrong tree, there's kind of squawk on the synth, which kind of feels, again, absolutely hilarious to me, and in the most brilliant kind of way. And the synth tone is used further, and it kind of provides a fantastic texture. It's kind of unbelievable for such a sci-fi kind of synthesizer tone in such a folk-influenced melody.
Yeah, exactly.
It is basically a reel, this one. It's in 4/4, has that kind of Irish feeling.
In the lyrics, there's one line in particular, which I think you'll probably agree with me is kind of the thesis statement of the album, where he says, "Here's the everlasting rub, neither am I good nor bad. I'd give up my halo for a horn and the horn for a hat I once had."
That I once had, that is his objective right now, that heaven or hell are not the places he wants to be on earth. The flies, right. We talked about the spiders, and there's life on my ceiling. The flies there are sleeping quietly. Very unclear on who the flies represent. Are the flies the dead people in heaven?
Yeah, I have no idea what that's about. All of the quieter parts where, those sections, I don't really know what those are about.
Because he used to have wings as well, right? His wings have just dropped off.
Yeah.
There's this line, it's kind of delivered in I think, feels like breaking the fourth wall, because the phrase dropped off is suddenly closer, without reverb, and feels like it's addressed directly to the listener.
Yeah. There's timpani back again. At least I think it's timpanis. And they took out, in the Steve Wilson remix, they took out the woo.
Oh, yeah.
Which, I can get behind that change, to be honest. I actually remember the first time I listened to the Steve Wilson mix, when we got to this part, I was thinking like, oh man, I wonder if they took out the woo, because that seems like a thing that Ian would probably want to take out.
Well, takes out a bit of the humor.
Yeah. But the jig is awesome. The jig is great. I love it. It's one of the best instrumental parts on the album, I think.
I don't think it's a jig. Yeah,
well, what is referred to as the jig, I guess.
Well, a jig is supposed to have a ternary rhythm, so I'm sorry, but that is a reel.
Okay, well, we can live with that.
Jig is always a 1-2-3 situation, and this is a 1-2-3-4 situation.
10:08 to Paddington. So I think the title is like a train schedule.
It is, but I think it also refers to this section being in 10/8.
Oh, I never knew that. That's clever.
Yeah, I looked at it and thought, hey, wait a minute. Is that in 10? And it is. It is takita takita doom, taka takita takita doom.
Wow.
Could say it's in 5/4, but well, in this situation, same thing.
I think this section is just like a memory. It's just like a little memory, maybe a sleeping memory. That's kind of what it represents to me in story-wise.
It could be, but well, if it's named as a train schedule, and we will be talking about a train and a railway station from which the hero will depart. It's interesting. Is it again a view of things to come? Is this the train that Ronnie is supposed to catch?
Yeah, could be.
Instead of, well, again, probably a familiar train, because his shoes are on the platform. So it's not the first time he will be on this train.
I don't remember. There's drums here, which I don't remember there being in the original mix. Am I forgetting those, or were those added on?
I think they were just pretty quiet.
Oh, okay. Because I didn't remember them when I first heard them in the Steve Wilson mix.
There were cymbals, but yeah, I think I agree.
Yeah, like the cymbals I remember, but I don't remember there being a drum accompaniment.
Yeah, you're completely right. This has been added. The drums are new. I have both versions next to each other in my DAW here, and I'm comparing them, and yeah, you're completely right. There has been no snare drum accompaniment on that. I don't think this is unnecessary. This one kind of feels nice.
Yeah, to me it's whatever. I mean, it doesn't change much, but it's just odd. I mean, why? Well, what was the reasoning behind it? I don't know.
Well, I think same as with the new part on Foot of Our Stairs. They found it, and they thought it sounded nice. Next track, Magus Perdé. this one in my notes, I have finally some bloody rock and roll.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the most rock part of this album.
Yeah.
And it's not like I've been missing rock and roll from the rest of the album, but this is a veritable culmination and climax of the entire experience, both musically and story-wise. So it stands to reason that it will have more force behind it.
Yeah, I had written in my notes that I think this is kind of the one song, quote-unquote song, on the album that I think could have worked as a standalone single.
Yeah, possibly. Not sure about... Well, yeah, it's close to 4 minutes, so a bit long for a single, but who knows.
And it's worth mentioning also, I guess, just how it comes out of nowhere during the Paddington section. It's very... Even today, it still kind of shocks me sometimes if I'm not expecting it.
Yeah, the guitar is very kind of rock and roll in a broad sense.
Yep.
And kind of telegraphs that we're hitting the main part of the story, whatever that is. So this is the moment where Ronnie returns to Earth, and in the reference to Magus Perdé, whoever he is, I think, and the way it is explained, quote unquote, in the lyrics, I think what happens there, my interpretation, I don't think I saw that on the Ministry website, is that Magus banishes Ronnie from the afterlife to Earth. Break the circle, stretch the line, call upon the devil, bring the gods on fire, and the conflict revel. This is kind of a magic ritual. They're drawing something in the sand, like a sigil, putting Ronnie in the middle and banishing him to Earth.
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way. I guess for me, like the Magus Perdé, whatever, Prada, I don't know. This whole
they think per day.
Per day, okay, thanks. This whole part, it's kind of the one like mystery of the album, because I think this part is not explained at all. And I don't know if it was meant to be a mystery or if it was meant to be this vague, but you know, who is the Magus Perdé person? Where is this even taking place? You know, is this in the afterlife? Is it in a limbo? Is it somewhere else? You know, and it's very mysterious, sort of what's happening in this part of the album.
Yeah, it's not clear at all what's happening in the story or how Ronnie ended up there. But yeah, I think what I managed to piece together in my imagination is a situation where they're maybe in the desert. Let me take a look again. Why am I imagining a beach there instead of the sandy desert of limbo that we started from? Probably because we are referencing a storm. And the storm about to be, I'm kind of picturing the sea there. And well, there's a ferry crossing again, so there is water.
Yeah, but the ferry crossing has to be the River Styx, I think.
Yeah, must be. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. There's the line. Cast your sweet spell upon the land and sea. So I am waiting along the sand. Cast your sweet spell upon the land and sea. So they are on a beach somewhere, which, well, maybe it represents the border, the boundary between life and death. Maybe it represents something else. And then I am imagining Magus drawing like a pentagram, a sigil of something, magical symbol of sorts, in the sand and sending off Ronnie back to life. Yeah.
The only thing that's clear to me is that whoever the Magus person is they're symbolically the representation of the third way, which is kind of the point of the album. There's, you know, what Ian is trying to say in this whole album is that in the moral binary, and particularly in the religious moral binary, it's usually presented as heaven and hell, but Ian is trying to say that there's a third way, and the Magus person is the representation of that third way.
Yeah, it's possible, and well, clearly this character is not really well described and left very much open to interpretation.
Yeah.
His name is partly a reference to the verb to lose in French and Latin, but the word per day doesn't really mean anything in French or Latin.
Yeah, I think you probably saw this, but on the Ministry website, there's a great little quote where it mentions that somebody backstage after a Tull show at some point asked Ian, who is Magus Perdé? And the only thing he said was it's a mixture of Latin and French.
Well, yeah, and it's not even really French.
Yeah.
In the Passengers upon the ferry crossing, this is probably the climax of the climax, and there's even a more straightforward rock part
Yeah.
of the album that comes right before the end, which kind of, well, running out of words here, the emotional apex of this whole experience.
Right. And I love those lyrics there about the passengers upon the ferry crossing waiting to be born, renewed the pledge of life's long song, rise to the reveille horn. I love that.
I didn't have time to look it up. Is the reveille horn a thing?
Yeah, that's I don't know if that's, I don't think it's an American, maybe it is, but reveille is in, I don't know if this is done today, but it's played on a trumpet to wake up soldiers in a camp. So just straightforward wake up call. I think it's the da 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 da. That's go to the races maybe, but I think that's what it is. But
interesting, yeah, because I do understand the word because it's in French. Réveil means to wake up.
Yeah,
that is just the meaning of the word.
But yeah, but basically it's a wake up call for soldiers is what it is.
So yeah. The ferry crossing representing the river Styx, but you don't come back across the river Styx.
Right.
So in the third way, instead of afterlife via heaven or hell, people are reincarnated.
Yeah.
And there being a lot of passengers kind of represents the fact that these people are already being reincarnated. So this was a possibility all the time. But it was Ronnie's choice that brought him there.
Right. I think the way that the entire ending of the album is handled is quite interesting because it's somewhat vague, but so in other words, I could imagine somebody casually listening to this album for the first time and coming away with a different interpretation of the ending. But
sure.
I still think there's enough hints at what's happening, where you have lyrics about renew the pledge of life's long song, and then at the end he mentions by the flame of ever life and that kind of thing, which very clearly is hinting towards a reincarnation.
Yeah. Interesting that eternal life is something that is normally used in a Christian context, quote unquote, as the representation of heaven, of paradise. But here it's used to represent the reincarnation, the life that goes on in multiple births.
Yeah. Musically, I like how there's those little stabs that just kind of run into each other towards the end. The da 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 da. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, and the ending is very grand here.
Yeah.
And not much to say besides that it's just such a fitting end for the album.
In the epilogue.
There was a rush along the Fulham Road into the ever-passion.
The epilogue, where the same phrase that we've had throughout the album is rephrased now into the Ever Passion Play.
Yeah.
So the rush along the Fulham Road is people coming back, being born again.
Right.
The rush into the Passion Play. And Ronnie is you can say that there is no ending here, but we've lost sight of our hero, because now Ronnie is among all those people and we don't see him anymore. He's in this crowd of people queuing up to be born.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never actually thought about the rush being souls being reincarnated. I've always imagined the protagonist as being the only person who's reincarnated, but I've never seen it that way. It could be.
Well, yeah, we do have these passengers waiting to be born. I interpreted that not in the way that Ronnie's the only person to be there, that he's among a crowd of people.
That's interesting. So in that case, I kind of see the ending as being, it's a revolution against the afterlife, and you sort of see that through bring the gods to God's own fire and that kind of thing. So and it's kind of like it's standing up to the gods, and it's multiple people. That's interesting. I've actually never interpreted it that way before.
Yeah, could have been that these people followed Ronnie.
Yeah.
Or maybe every one of those people has had their own path to this new birth, and they ended up there together. But again, we've been following a single destiny throughout the story, but it turns out that there are a lot of people like that. One of the ways of looking.
So then you go to the very end of the album where the heartbeat comes back, but it's very clearly different. It sounds very altered and non-human. It sounds, which I think is just to be indicative of sort of a reborn soul or a reincarnation.
Yeah, I don't think the fact that being like sounding more synthesizer-like represents something besides it just sounding different. Again, maybe it's us losing sight of the hero. We are farther away now.
Yeah.
We are not very close to him and next to his chest, listening to his heartbeat. This is something already reverberating through space.
To me, it's like the Uberman coming out, like the reincarnated, the new version, that it sounds somewhat, like you said, synthesized or constructed. It's kind of interesting. And I love how it ends on, there's those just sort of random like stabs going out through the end of the album, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and the inexplicable cries.
Yeah, I was wondering if you would bring that up. So he says Steve Caroline.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered what that means, what that's supposed to be.
Yeah, no one really knows that, as far as I could tell from the online discussions. But to me, it just feels like, well, we are in the theater, right? Throughout the entire album. The album is a theatrical play. And this is already people rushing out of the theater, calling to each other. Or maybe someone's calling out to the actors, I don't know, trying to throw a bouquet of flowers onto the stage. So this is what I mean. I think these cries represent the commotion at the end of a play. And there's not much else to it.
Yeah, I always interpreted it as the protagonist calling out to people who he knew in his life that he's seeing again.
Oh yeah, could be. Yeah. We could put it like that. But well, he's just been born.
Yeah, so he's a different person, I guess.
Yeah, well, he's a toddler.
Yeah, or maybe he's a little ant or something.
Leaving tiny ant drops in the sand. Well, if it's the voice of Ronnie, then it is the voice inside his own head, because if he's been reborn, that he's been reborn as a 0-year-old kid. So if he's seeing his friends, then it is sort of his soul seeing the friends as it, I don't know, flies towards his new body, something like that. So he wouldn't be capable. I don't think he's rising from the grave, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
there would be more screams, I believe. In such a situation. Yeah, know what you mean. Happens sometimes.
This is probably not at all related, but it's just something I've thought of with the Caroline thing. So I imagine you've probably seen the video of Tull live at Golders Green on Songs from the Wood tour. And if you remember, when they introduce Hunting Girl, Ian tells a little story about Caroline, or Big C. And I mean, I doubt that there's any relation there to Passion Play, but that's the only other instance of Caroline I can think of with Tull, and I thought that was kind of interesting. If maybe there is some kind of relation there. Yeah,
that's curious, must be noted. I don't think I saw that one.
Really? That's like one of the classic, like, pro shot Tull videos from the 70s.
Maybe I didn't. I definitely don't remember the Caroline story.
So this was a very metaphysical episode. Kind of sounds like we were in like a psychiatric chair or something.
Yeah. Well, to conclude and to talk about what for me this album feels like in the Tull discography. Last time when we were talking about Thick as a Brick, and I mentioned that both Thick as a Brick and A Passion Play are very dear to me, and I can't really choose between them. There's but one thing. As I listened to A Passion Play yesterday, and last time before that I had listened to it, I think in January or something, but I put on the vinyl record just to have an uninterrupted listen of it. And my objective was, I just wanted to listen to the saxophone parts, kind of note down where they were. I had a stopwatch running. I was listening to the parts, jotting down some of my initial thoughts about the album without stopping it. And by the time I finished, I was completely emotionally drained. This album, even though I was sort of otherwise preoccupied by writing things down and making notes, it picked me up and it wrung me out. I don't think there is another Tull album that does it to me to that extent. When I stood up, I felt weak at the knees. And in the way, you know, I don't smoke, but I need a cigarette. It took me some time to just pull my thoughts together and to be able to string to a coherent sentence. So yeah, Thick as a Brick is something I enjoy, maybe sort of cerebrally. I'm not saying it's worse, or I'm not saying the Passion Play is better. I'm saying that the kind of emotion that A Passion Play elicits within me is unparalleled completely.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a very good way. Yeah, I've been using the words like emotionally drained, but it's cathartic, you know, that's what catharsis is by definition. You are forced to feel a lot of emotions to clear you of them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you put a gun to my head and said it's one or the other, I would say A Passion Play is my number one.
That's interesting.
Just because it takes me on an experience that no other album does.
Yeah. That's interesting, that idea of being drained by an album, because I know what that feels like. I don't know if there's any Tull albums that do that for me. Maybe Thick as a Brick sort of does.
Uh-huh.
The one album I can say with certainty does is Blonde by Frank Ocean. That's an album that I have to pace when I listen to it, because it hits you. It's so emotional when you listen to it. It hits you so hard.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I don't know. If I had to pick between Thick as a Brick and Passion Play, I would pick Thick as a Brick just because I like it more.
Yeah.
But I love both of these albums. I love them in somewhat similar but different ways, because I think that's the kind of albums they are. They're somewhat similar but in different ways.
Yeah, and I think the way A Passion Play feels so emotional to me, it's because it's well executed according to its theme. Thick as a Brick is an album about a boy being angry at the world.
Yeah.
Right? So there's not much place for that kind of strong emotion. While A Passion Play is a story about a person coming back to life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more, well, to use a glib phrase in this context, more passionate.
Yeah. I like the attempt that was made at a lot of the religious symbolism, a lot of the references to sort of ancient, religious texts and things like that. I like a lot of the influences from Dante and Paradise Lost and that kind of thing. That's one of the things I appreciate the most about this album, just because you don't see modern rock stars writing about that kind of material.
Yeah, well, it takes Ian Anderson to do that.
Yeah. So this was a big discussion today. We've had several episodes in a row now where we've gone very long, had a lot to say, but I think on the next episode we'll be getting back to sort of regularly scheduled programming, I guess, which will be a nice break for all of us maybe. But I'm glad we were able to get through this one and Thick as a Brick, and I think we had a lot of really great discussion on both of these episodes, and so hopefully everybody listening enjoyed them too. Let us know what you think about these two albums. Very big albums which are very well regarded in the Tull fan base. Let us know if you like Thick as a Brick or Passion Play more than the other, if you have a preference, if you think one is stronger, weaker than the other. But otherwise, we'll see you all in 2 weeks with War Child.
See you all. Cheers.
Thanks.